On September 8, 1565, sails appear on the horizon. Spanish ships anchor in shallow waters. Men step down into smaller boats. Among them, Pedro Menendez de Avilés. He does not find a city. There are no walls, no structured harbor, only a sandy rise, dense vegetation, unstable ground, and a difficult shoreline. There, San Agustín is born, in the Spanish province of La Florida. Today, it is known as St. Augustine, Florida. It is not born as a prosperous farming colony. It is not born as a commercial center. It is born as a strategic position. France has already attempted to establish a presence to the north, at Fort Caroline. Spain cannot allow that. The silver route moving up from the Caribbean must remain protected. The first fort is made of wood and earth, built quickly, defensive, imperfect. Houses rise around it, logs, mud, thatched roofs. The layout is irregular. Nothing suggests permanence, only urgency. Palisades are raised from freshly cut trunks, still damp, driven into sandy soil that shifts under weight. Earth from trenches is piled against the walls for reinforcement, but frequent rain washes part of it away. Inside the perimeter, improvised storehouses protect gunpowder with leather and waxed cloth. There is no stone, no deep foundations. Every structure feels temporary, as if it could be dismantled at any moment. The first years are marked by instability, disease, conflict with indigenous populations, food shortages. The settlement depends on support from Havana and Mexico. Without the situado, it does not survive. Constant humidity breeds fevers and infections. Supplies spoil easily. Flour molds. Salted meat rots when barrels split open. Small gardens are cleared in open patches, but sandy soil yields little. Fishing helps, but it cannot sustain the entire garrison. Every ship that appears on the horizon carries more than provisions. It carries time. When seas are rough or convoys are delayed, tension becomes visible. Soldiers wait for pay that does not always arrive. Discipline depends on hope. The town is not self-sufficient. It is a fragile extension of a distant empire, tied together by vulnerable sea routes. Any prolonged interruption would mean abandonment, and yet no one withdraws. Remaining there is a strategic decision, but also an act of insistence. In the 1570s, the village is forced to rebuild several times. The first forts erected after 1565 do not remain in the same place. At least once, the settlement must be moved to slightly higher ground after erosion, and structural problems weaken the original palisades. Wooden walls rot faster than expected under constant humidity. Coastal winds tear down fragile roofing. Heavy rains turn the ground into mud, compromising shallow foundations. In addition, regional clashes with indigenous groups allied with the French create moments of armed tension that require reinforcement and reorganization of the defensive perimeter. These are not decisive battles, but skirmishes serious enough to expose vulnerabilities. In 1586, English sails appear off the coast at dawn, rising slowly beyond the blurred line of the horizon. Sir Francis Drake comes ashore with armed, disciplined men. External resistance is minimal. The garrison is too small to sustain prolonged combat. The town is quickly overrun. Doors are forced open. Storehouses are looted. Houses are set on fire one by one. Flames spread easily through the dry wooden structures. The church burns. The fort is abandoned. What remains is thick smoke, embers still glowing, and rows of charred posts marking where walls once stood. In the decades following the attack of 1586, St. Augustine is rebuilt, but it remains vulnerable. The fort is still made of wood and earth. Houses are raised again on shallow foundations. The town does not grow, it endures. Missions expand into the interior, extending Spanish presence beyond the coast. The situado sustains soldiers and supplies. In 1668, another English raid exposes the same fragility. It becomes clear that wood is no longer enough. In 1670, the English found Charlestown in Carolina. Pressure increases. The Spanish government decides that improvisation is no longer acceptable. In 1672, construction begins on what will permanently alter the city's landscape, the Castillo de San Marcos. Blocks of coquina are quarried from Anastasia Island. Boats cross the channel carrying freshly cut stone, still damp and pale. Coquina is unusual, formed from compressed shells over thousands of years. Soft when removed from the quarry, it can be shaped with relative ease. It gradually hardens as it dries under the coastal sun, and above all, it absorbs impact instead of shattering. The construction site transforms the rhythm of the town. Hammers echo during the day. Stone dust accumulates on the ground. Simple wooden cranes lift heavy blocks with thick ropes. Indigenous laborers, soldiers, craftsmen, and enslaved Africans share the continuous physical effort. It is not a quick project, it is a project measured in decades. The design follows the Italian bastioned model, 4 angled bastions allowing crossfire in all directions. A dry moat surrounds the structure, thick walls engineered to withstand naval artillery. Each layer of stone represents a response to past vulnerabilities. As the castle rises, the town changes around it. Central houses begin using coquina instead of wood. Clay roof tiles replace fragile thatch. Walled interior courtyards organize domestic space and offer protection from wind. The plaza becomes a permanent axis of urban order. The church is rebuilt with greater structural solidity. St. Augustine no longer looks temporary. The landscape no longer suggests a defensive encampment. It suggests an intention to remain. In 1695, the Castillo is completed. The shift in defensive logic is immediate. Now any invasion will face stone, not wood. This transformation is tested only a few years later. November 1702, James Moore leads forces from Carolina southward. Troops advance by land. Indigenous allies accompany them. The outer town does not resist. The population takes refuge inside the Castillo. Houses are set on fire. The plaza disappears under smoke. The bombardment begins. English cannons fire iron projectiles against the walls. The sound reverberates across the bay. Inside the fortress, civilians and soldiers wait. The impacts do not produce devastating splinters. The coquina absorbs the energy. Projectiles embed themselves in the walls. 4-meter thickness prevents any significant breach. Days pass. English artillery is limited. There is no effective naval blockade. Spanish reinforcements approach from Havana. Moore withdraws. When the smoke clears, the outer town is destroyed. But the Castillo remains intact. That moment redefines St. Augustine. The town learns it cannot depend solely on a single isolated fortress. In the decades that follow, the defensive system expands. To the north, in 1738, Fort Mose emerges, a settlement of free black men who accept military service to Spain. To the south, in 1742, Fort Matanzas is built to control secondary maritime access. St. Augustine becomes a defensive triangle. There is no complete urban wall as in Havana or San Juan, but there is coordinated territorial control. At the same time, the internal society is diverse. Spaniards born in the peninsula, Creoles born in Florida, enslaved Africans, free blacks, Christianized indigenous survivors of the missions. The town is not large, about 2,000 inhabitants in the 1730s, but it is complex. Daily life is disciplined by climate and scarcity. Heat demands thick walls and cross-ventilation. Supplies depend on maritime convoys. Trade is limited. Power is military and religious. Even after the siege of 1702, threats continue. In 1740, British troops moved down from Georgia under the command of James Oglethorpe. Fort Mose is taken. Batteries are positioned north of the town. Ships attempt to blockade the coast. The bombardment lasts for weeks. Once again, the walls absorb the impacts. The Castillo resists, not by luck, but by design. The blockade fails. Supplies continue arriving through secondary routes. Disease and exhaustion weaken British forces. With no breach in the walls and no surrender in sight, Oglethorpe orders retreat. The town remains under Spanish control. Throughout the 1750s, the urban layout stabilizes. Orthogonal blocks become clearly defined. The Plaza de Armas consolidates as the administrative and social center. Coquina houses dominate central areas. Wooden structures persist on the outskirts. St. Augustine does not grow vertically. It remains low, spread out, functional. In 1763, after the 7 Years' War, Spain cedes Florida to Great Britain. There is no final battle, no epic siege. The flag simply changes. Much of the Spanish population leaves for Cuba. Houses are left empty. The town once again faces uncertainty. But something has become permanent. Over nearly 2 centuries, St. Augustine survived fires, attacks, scarcity, and political abandonment. It was never a dominant commercial center, never an imperial metropolis. It was something else, an outpost that refused to disappear. When observing the town in this period, it should not be imagined as a vibrant scene of colonial wealth. It should be understood as a defensive organism, each street defined by necessity, each thick wall shaped by fear of artillery, each reconstruction the result of insistence. The physical landscape, marshes, shallow bay, sandy soil, never changed. The climate remained heavy. The wind continued carrying salt. But the town learned to adapt. Wood became stone. Vulnerability became a defensive system. Isolation became regional strategy. And that continuity, more than prosperity, is what defines St. Augustine in the Spanish period. It did not win expansionist wars. It did not enrich empires. It simply did something extremely difficult. It continued to exist.